So first of all, I'm going to put up my on this. I'm going to put up my Patreon information for those who wish to donate. It'll be put up in the chat. It's also in the bottom of the description. If you go to the page, you'll see a lot more information about it, and you can donate between $1 to $100 or more a month, and it really helps me out as I'm in disability and I'm trying to earn a living as I'm not getting any ad revenue currently. And it helps me with the production of this as well as other different things for actually being able to earn a living, and that'll really help me out for different things. So if you want to help me out with it, that would be a really nice thing to do. Any type of donation will be greatly appreciated. I'm putting up the address right now in the chat. Is also in the bottom of the, as I said, in the bottom of the description. Now in this, we're basically going to go over a couple different things. Number one, we're going to really kind of discuss what the actual term of Semitic means, what it means for anti-Semitism. We're going to go over Ben Shapiro's argument, anti-Semitism, that he's brought up for a while. And we're going to look at his background to really show if it really means much. We're going to discuss the difference between Judaism and an actual Semitic person and why there's an actual difference. We're going to show you also why criticism of Jewish state or any states is not bigotry, but really just valid criticism of that state itself and their policies. And then we'll actually look at some issues on Ilhan Omar and why her points are not really as consistent as they should be. Now first we want to discuss on what Semitic really means. Now it refers to the actual languages. This is one thing that people don't understand. Now, when people try to put arguments against me, what they're pointing to is the modern definitions of the areas of where these Semitic languages are, such as in Southern Semitic, such as in the Southern Semitic languages, where they tend to point out that Cushitic is the language of Somalia. Yes, we understand that, but the fact is you need to go to the original historic regions when we're talking about this, and that's where you tend to get a different, complete and utter historical viewpoint of where this is, and this is where we decide where these people are. It's not just the actual Semitic language itself, but the Semitic language decides which people are actually Semitic, and this is very crucial. Because otherwise then if we use these points, then anybody speaking a Semitic language in their actual current lifestyle could actually be deemed as Semitic, which is not accurate. And basically anybody could actually speak this, and regardless of their actual background, and then we could basically declare that someone who is completely not Semitic could actually be claimed as such. Now most of the Semitic region, despite what people actually know about it, is actually Arabic when we look at the bulk of the region. And this is one thing with it, when they tend to use the term Islamophobic, it really, in most applications, does not make any sense. It only makes any sense when you're talking to people out of this Semitic region, which tends to actually be people who are within Central Asia, Southeast Asia, the areas of Europe, the other areas of Africa, and going into the areas of Europe, going into the areas of other areas of Asia, going into like China and Russia, and then going into the areas of the America as well as East, as I said, East Asia. But but people don't understand this, and that this applies to not just those, but also the other Semitic language people. So when we talk about this, these are not necessary of the people that speak these Semitic languages. So those technically are that would be for Islamophobic for those with it, but it would that's why I use those with it. But essentially, bigotry of Jews could essentially apply to people who are outside of the region of these Semitic regions, and that's just bigotry of Jews, a complete different area. And this is why we're going to get to a very, very crucial thing. This does not necessarily mean anti-Semitism, and this is a very, very crucial thing that we need to understand. Now we need to get to, now that we've defined that, we need to understand that there's a very, very crucial point that needs to be understood is when we talk about Ben Shapiro's argument on anti-Semitism. He has stated that he has been targeted with anti-Semitic attacks. This is what he has stated in his past. Now, can we validate this? Now, here's the thing. He states his family is Jewish. Okay, we'll validate that as a fact. He states that, but we look at his past, his family immigrated from Russia and Lithuania. Now, when we look at that, we need to look at the region of Semitic languages from the historic scent. And if we start to look at the distance in area, we see that the closest thing would be that it would be Russia would be the actual region. And that means that it would be approximately about 2,200 miles away. Now, just to give you a reference point, that's approximately the distance between Milwaukee, which is probably the closest town of 100,000 or more people. It's approximately about 500,000 people, to San Diego. Now, you should have an idea of that distance. We're talking basically the largest city in Wisconsin to a city that's basically almost as far down as you get in California. This is this distance that we're talking about. This is a huge distance. It might even be a little bit longer than that because that's including driving distance. When we're talking direct distance, it might even be a little bit farther than that. So when we're talking about this distance, this is a long distance. That's a massive area that we're talking about. That's the distance between two places. And when we look at the weather between Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and San Diego, California, the weather is completely different. The people are completely different. The actual demographics are different. They've never been anywhere close to being the same. They're nothing like one another. The actual makeup of the cities are nothing like one another. And that would be like someone from Milwaukee saying, well, hey, we both speak English, so we must be the same. I'm no different than a resident from San Diego. And that would be about the most absurd argument. I mean, when we look at such as San Diego, when we look at them, we'll look at their let's look at some of their sister cities. You'll see that they have Cavite City, Philippines, and if you look at a city just right south of where I live, which is another one, which is Kenosha, which would be roughly about the same amount of distance. It would be Makati City in the Philippines. They could say, hey, we're just like each other. Well, when you start looking at that, well, guess what? Then you start then you can start basically changing around what people start saying about these things, and you're basically making an actual argument that's completely irrational. Now, he's not Semitic, and we have proof right here. He's from Russian and Lithuanian descent. He's Jewish by religion, but he's actually Russian and Lithuanian. Now, when we start to look at these actually, when you look at the actual people, you'll actually see that you'll actually see that when it comes down to the people of Russia, you'll see that basically is they are actually basically when it comes down to the people, they tend to cover them as what they call either Caucasus or technically originally the term of Caucasian. Uh, and these are what would be under the term of Ashkenazi Jews. Now, there's many Jews within Russia. When it comes to Lithuania, the actual people of Lithuania is you would have to go to the actual same term as well, and you look through their people, and a lot of their people go between the actual terms, and you can see basically, so he's basically pretty much most likely within that area, he's mostly pretty much ethnically Russian. So to basically, he could not claim himself as being Semitic because of his region, which is why he doesn't look like a Semitic person. If you want to look at a Semitic person, you look at someone like Bashar al-Assad. That would be an area that would be ethnically someone who would be Semitic. And you'll see if you look at the difference when you actually look at him, he looks nothing like Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro is very, very light in complexion, and you see what it called Bashar al-Assad is a lot darker. If you keep going down, and this is just within that region. If you look at people from Cyprus, which is you'll see that's another area that is actually technically Semitic as well. And this is another one that's forgotten, and you'll actually see that's you'll see that that they're and and when you start to look at like people from Cyprus, you'll see that they look completely different as well. I mean, yes, there's a lot of Greek influence from Cyprus, but you're going to notice that they look completely different than the people of than what Ben Shapiro looks like. And it goes down with it, and you're going to find out that he's pretty much when you look at him, he looks no different than a lot of other Russians. And to basically claim yourself as being Semitic is completely irrational. And this is why, I mean, basically, you're talking when you look at the regions, one who would be Semitic would be Ilhan Omar, which is technically, when you look at her thing, is where her background is Somalia. Now, Somalia is actually a region which is Semitic. If you look at the people of the region, she looks like people who are Southern Semitic. That is actually a person who is Semitic. Now, it doesn't matter that people dislike what she's stated and all these other things. She would be a Semitic person. Now, this is where the argument needs to come from. We need to actually look at a legitimate argument of what anti-Semitism. Now we need to go with anti-Semitism. Now, anti-Semitism would essentially be hatred of people who are of real Semitic backgrounds. Does not necessarily mean that this does not necessarily mean criticism of an actual country. This is an actual hatred of people of these backgrounds. Now, this would be essentially people who would essentially try to target a specific group of people, such as the Palestinians, who are an unarmed people. Now, this is essentially, when we look at this, legitimately, when we see the people in Congress that are actually basically in the request of AIPAC, which is a Israeli political lobby, that at their request, that would essentially to target the actual people of Palestine. That is an actual act of anti-Semitism. You're targeting a group of people based on them being Semitic. That is an act of anti-Semitism. And Ben Shapiro has attacked the people of these Palestinian people. That is an act of anti-Semitism. Now, when we look at the actual people of Israel, when you look at the actual formation, the way that Israel was actually formed was actually after the Treaty of Versailles. It was actually, they brought people down there from there were actually Eastern European immigrants into the United Kingdom. Specifically, they were actually living in poor areas like Whitechapel. They wanted to get rid of them, so they shoved them down there. This was a way that they actually carved up the Middle East. And this was done by them and France. England and France basically carved up the Middle East. Because they didn't want Russia to have any influence of the region. They also did this along with occupying Germany as well. And this was done after the World War I, which essentially was a war based on Britain being paranoid of Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire basically having trade relations, and they were paranoid because they didn't want any competition of them being any challenge for the superpower of the region. And they knew that essentially if that were to happen and there were to be actually trade relations, that would actually happen. Now, when people are told that it was over an assassination over Archduke Franz Ferdinand with it, that's a completely erroneous statement, because that would have actually been a regional civil war, and this regional civil war never broke out. What ended up happening was, the fact is you had Britain attack them without provocation. And it was actually, Britain was the aggressor in the whole thing. So what ended up happening after the wars, they ended up basically branding Germany as the bad guys, putting people in the German army in jail until they would basically agree not to become capitalist anymore, and leave them basically where they had the option of becoming either a basic progressive, which they knew was not going to amount to anything, and it was going to leave Germany in shambles. Communism, which is basically going to be under the control of the Soviet Union, and even the progressive movement was still going to be under the control of both the United States and France, or socialism, which is going to be the only independent government, which they knew was not going to work. And this ended up, that's where they got where they were. So then what ended up happening was what you saw with the rise of Hitler. So when we go back to what ended up happening with Israel was, with this carve up of the area, is the Palestinians were thrown out. They put these Eastern European British people, Eastern European Jews that were in Britain, they threw them down there. So this was essentially your starting population there. There were some Jews who were already within the area living with the Palestinians, but basically it was a small population. Then what you had is, after the point, you had So you had a small sum people after the Holocaust moved down to Israel, but most of the people of after the Holocaust either stayed in Europe, moved to the moved to either North, Central, or South America, or moved to Asia, East Asia. Uh, so then you only get grabbed to some few with it, and then after the point they after the 60s when they gained independence, they made themselves as a Jewish state and told a lot of Jews to move out there. Well, these were essentially Jews, and not they were not Semitic in any such way. Now, this essentially is just creating a Jewish state. You're not creating a Semitic state, you're creating a Jewish state. Thus, the actual difference. And this is why we actually need to know the difference between Judaism and a Semitic person. Now, what they did is they kicked out Semitic people, and there's only a small fraction of people in that country in which are actually Semitic that are left. There's the Arabic people who are still naturally living there. Then there's a small percentage of people who are Jewish and who are originally there. The majority of the Jewish people who are there are not Semitic, and that's a major point to understand. Thus, when Ben Shapiro makes these arguments of anti-Semitism, now Ben Shapiro has also made arguments saying that anti-Semitism is on the rise. Now, this is another point. This is part of that victim mentality that we find. Now, Ben Shapiro's made this point with it, and frankly, this is not the case. He's not been a target of anti-Semitism, but rather basically just been a target of people who are going to be critical of him, and they're basically going to take any type of insult they're going to use. Now, he's trying to basically hide behind this and use this as an excuse. He's doing no different than people on the left that are taking the victim mentality. And as we actually learned from the teachings of Ayn Rand, instead of actually becoming a victim and using that for a sense of power with it, be the victor instead and actually rise above that. But he does not believe this, because if you look at his background, he's actually a neoconservative and not, and goes off of the teachings of Trotsky. Now, Trotsky was actually originally a follower of Joseph Stalin. That means communism. So when we were talking about this, it was basically militarily we're talking about communism here. And basically he believes in this idea of basically having the U.S. government police the world and all this other garbage, and he doesn't believe in these ideas of liberty. He's not a pro-liberty person. He'll preach these ideas of pro-life, but then when you start preaching ideas of being pro-war, you're not pro-life. He preaches ideas of being pro-death penalty, which is not pro-life. So he is not pro-life whatsoever. He just tends to be anti-abortion, which is, you're not being pro-life. You're not consistent. You're completely inconsistent when it comes down to it. And this is why the left can easily destroy him when it comes to arguments. And then he resorts to this victim mentality when they start to pick him apart. And people tend to pick him apart very readily because he's not that bright. He comes from an actual law degree, and he does not know anything about history. He doesn't. He's been basically indoctrinated in schools and learned the actual progressive revisionist forms of history. So he does not know anything that he is talking about. He's basically talking out of his backside. So when he's actually talking about these things, he does not know where he's coming from. He basically starts spitting out these arguments, but he doesn't know what he's doing. He's basically spitting out talking points, and he doesn't know what he's saying. And he's none too bright. He tries to talk in a soft manner and using larger vocabulary to actually accentuate, to make him look a lot smarter than he really is. But he really is not that bright. It's basically, I would call him pretty much the right-wing version of Barack Obama. And if you start actually picking apart his arguments, you'll see that he tends, just like Barack Obama, to take the victim mentality. And he doesn't really validate any of his points. I mean, he doesn't stand up to any type of criticism to any degree. He tends to view a lot of pro-big state programs. The only things he tends to believe in is basically being pro-war. I mean, you're talking that he doesn't. I mean, that he tends to. I mean, he tends to basically. I mean, when it came down to the idea of in the elections, he was supporting Ted Cruz. Well, and he was rejecting Donald Trump. Well, he ended up flipping on it the moment that Trump started to get these people that were. He tended to flip on that the moment that Trump was getting these people that were. So they were pretty much these never Trumpers that were in the John Hay initiative in his administration. Now he seems to love Trump, and this is the whole thing. And these were the same people that were voting for Hillary Clinton. So when they were, so when it comes down to it, he's not even consistent. I mean, he tends to be, and he tends to basically be very, very inconsistent when it comes down to it. He tends to want to. He's been one to actually want to, when it comes to gun rights. He wants to actually keep the current laws in the books, which means these are laws that are actually unconstitutional. If he actually read the Constitution, he would understand that it actually states against that. He's he does not even know, when it comes against abortion, he does not know how to articulate himself at an actual scientific level. He just refers to as abortion as a violent act. He does not articulate himself in such a manner in which it makes him sound intelligent. He's basically he's pretty much, when it comes down to it, is he could actually be described as someone who would be anti-Semitic, because essentially he is not Semitic himself, as we've discussed. He's actually stated that he basically would actually prefer that we go after Palestinians. And this is basically, and he says the Palestinian population is indistinguishable from terrorist leadership. Now, this is basically talking points from the actual state media of Israel. And if we look at Israel, that's actually comments that are actually basically, if we look at the actual structure of Israel, they've actually been a state that's actually rejected capitalism on multiple occasions. And there's reasons why, because they were actually founded before the actual case of the Holocaust came about. Now, if they actually were against the Holocaust, if these were the actual people there, and if they were actually trying to be very, very vocal about this and stating their actual opinions on that this is something wrong and this is something we need to stop, they would have been very, very vocal about ending the idea of basically committing anything against any other people, such as they have when they would actually try to make peace with the Palestinians. Number one, they wouldn't have, as it's been declassified, used the Mossad to create the group Hamas to basically badmouth them and create a group to essentially uh, create a system to where they were basically meaning to demean the actual Palestinians. And the only reason why the Palestinians are working with them is because the fact is there's no other way that they can be armed. They're essentially been disarmed by the actual Israeli government, which is really no different than you find in any system that you find today with socialist governments. It's what Hitler did. It's what Hitler did out in Germany, and the reason why they believe in this stuff is because they're essentially people that came before. That's a lot of these people that are there with it. They came before, so they don't believe in this idea of stopping this type of mentality. All those people that actually escaped from the Holocaust either stayed in Europe, they went to the Americas, they went to East Asia. That was where they went. They didn't go down to Israel. Virtually none of them did. That's why it doesn't matter what you have, if they call it conservative or liberal, it's all the same. That's the only thing that changes is the actual foreign policy. Liberal tends to be a little more dovish. What they call conservative tends to be a lot more hawkish. And when he tends to back this idea with it, it's no different. Now, where are they getting their money? Well, what they do is they actually use this through lobbying. Thus, where we start to get on the idea of Ilhan Omar. Now, Ilhan Omar is actually validating her point because of what they have been doing. And this is what AIPAC does. AIPAC essentially gets their money from from actually leeching it from the United States, amongst other ones. And when it comes down to the things with it, is you can basically state that when it goes back to Shapiro, is you can state that the left uses identity politics, which I totally hate. But the fact is we're talking that we have extremist people like Ben Shapiro who use basically identity politics himself. He calls for this, accusing the liberals of using a hierarchy of victimhood with it, but the fact is he's using it himself. He's also called for insane ideas of the Sedition Act to basically be reinstated. He's basically done these insane ideas in the past. I mean, this man is completely and utterly insane. And he's been wanting to criticize the alt-right movement. Now, the alt-right movement, he's basically saying is garbage ideas, but the fact is he loves to he's been one to essentially group the alt-right with what the left tries to group as the alt-light, which is basically libertarian conservatives. The reason why is because him being a neoconservative, he doesn't want essentially anybody trying to kill it. He's basically one of these people that's a young neoconservative. And he's basically one of these insane people that basically doesn't know what he's talking about. Frankly, if you look at his background from his actual degree, you look at it and he actually has an actual law doctorate degree. Now, if he were really an actual quality lawyer, he would either A, directly be in politics, or B, would have actually gone into law. Look at his actual background. None of it. We don't see any of the actual background in law. Where did he go? He went nowhere. He might be a lawyer by actual degree, but he didn't do anything with it. This means that he is incapable. He is incapable of actually being considered a quality enough lawyer. And frankly, with it is that's because the fact is he doesn't actually have the actual mental capabilities, and he can. I mean, he can pretty much, and he's basically one of these social conservatives that wants to basically bring us back to the puritanical times, and he's one of the people that's pretty much on the same ideas as the liberals during the progressive era. He's no different than FDR. And this is essentially what the people that actually want actual freedom of speech fight against. And when it comes down to it, these are the people that they fight against were people like this. And when the people on the left go, see, you're just a bunch of what it called stuck-up white people that basically don't want any freedom for people, this is who they're talking about. They're talking about morons like this. The morons like Ben Shapiro that actually go and they actually try to become, they actually act as a victim, and they basically talk out of their backside and don't know what they're talking about on any of the issues, and all they want to basically do is basically turn the country into some puritanical system and basically play, let's bomb the brown people. That's what he's into. Let's bomb the brown people. Why? Because I don't like the brown people. Why? Oh, because I want to make Israel a supremacy state. Why? Because I believe the Jews are the chosen people. Well, the fact is, that's Jewish supremacy. That's hatred. That's bigotry. And there you go. That's what you have with him. Now, when you have on the problems with Ilhan Omar, now her problems is while she is bringing up some real legitimate points on the criticism of AIPAC, she needs to do so with the actual thing of CARE, because CARE is the exact same thing, but for Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the world's largest sponsor of terrorism, and they're actually, guess what, when it comes down to allyship, they're linked up with, you know it, Israel. So if you're actually going to go after these people, you need to understand that you're going to have to do it on both sides. You can't exactly be the one to actually go and go after these people and be legitimate about. You're going to actually be legitimate. You're going to have to make your argument actually consistent. Her problem is she is not consistent. She's going after one side but not the other. And this is the whole point that where her problem is. And I think we need to actually get to that actual legitimate point. As if she was actually consistent, she wouldn't have an issue. And if she were looking at this legitimately, she would actually be saying, okay, we're going to criticize Israel on what they're doing with foreign policy. They're basically dictating the United States foreign policy. But she needs to also stop speaking with CARE and basically saying they're doing it as well. She needs to actually get out there and say, CARE is doing it as well. CARE is going out there and speaking and actually taking over the foreign policy of the United States, and she needs to actually go out there and actually say that. She needs to say about these two different groups and say, these are the problems with it. We need to get back to actually taking care of our own foreign policy. Now, foreign policy should be dictated by your own nation. And I think when it comes down to it, I think we need to actually look at something's valid. And we need to start thinking in a very, very sensible manner. And I think this is something that really would really make sense for the actual country, is start making our own foreign policy decisions. Because frankly, what we're dealing with right now is we have our foreign policy decisions being made by NATO, which is one of the militant arms of the United Nations. It's being made by AIPAC, which is basically a lobbyist for the state of Israel, and it's being made by CARE, which is basically one of the lobbyists for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So when you're having these being the actual forces for what's happening, guess what's going to happen? You make no decisions for your actual foreign policy for your country. You're basically doing the bidding of these three groups. And guess what happens to your budget, your defense budget? Every one of your budgets, you're paying for everyone else. And that's completely insane. I mean, we're basically paying for global terrorism for the Saudi kingdom. We're basically paying for Israel to basically bomb whoever they want to bomb and without impunity, and to basically restructure. We've been paying for them to restructure the whole Middle East and Central Asia as long as they want, and us to do it for them, and us to have our military men die for them. And we've been paying for NATO to harass Russia and kill any type of normal relations with them, and basically to be this huge defense contractor slush fund. When we're looking at it, and guess who's basically supporting all of those things? If you guessed people like Ben Shapiro, you would be exactly right. Now, when Ben Shapiro's arguing against people like Hamas, guess what? Guess who's actually funding them? It's not Iran. It's actually the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Iran is not going to fund a Sunni group. They're Shia. It doesn't take much of a brain to actually figure that one out. But he kind of lacks there with it because he's not the brightest brick in the wall. I don't think he could spell dictionary, nor actually open one himself. If he actually has one in his house, it probably is in its original wrapping. Because if he did, he would actually understand that there's a difference between Shia and Sunni Islam. They don't like each other. This is where people that actually have a brain like Rand Paul actually understand that these groups don't like each other, and understand that Hamas, even though it was founded by the Mossad, which is from Israel, they're still linked as a Sunni group. This Sunni group, which is linked with Palestine, another Sunni nation, is going to be linked with only with Sunni countries. They're never going to be dealing with Shia countries. Shia countries and Sunni countries hate each other. They do not like each other one bit. They're not going to be dealing with one another. The only case with it where they might actually be willing to break down some type of peace agreement is, I would say, probably with the Kurdish people and the Iranian people. That's only in the case of Syria, and that's because they want to develop some type of level of peace, and that's because it's in both of their best interests with the case of Syria. But outside of that situation, we're talking that they don't like that these groups don't like each other. This is just a basic fact, and people need to understand this, and this is just history, and this has been going on for a long time because the actual beliefs are completely different. Sunnis are actually the ones that developed the idea of a caliphate. They want an actual global domination. When it comes to Shia, they're actually anti-imperialistic, meaning they just want to be left alone in the regional areas, and they don't want actually people taking over their areas, and they want the idea of sovereignty protected. Which means when it comes down to that, you're going to have some serious problems between these two groups of people. One group is this world domination group. The other group is this leave us alone group. And when it comes down to it, when the other one wants to essentially establish this world caliphate, the other one essentially is going to be, we're going to fight over this. Because the fact is, it's going to cause a huge problem. Now, when you create a huge vacuum, the one that basically wants to establish sovereignty is going to essentially fill the vacuum, because they know if they don't, it's going to cause a huge problem for the actual region and terrorism, and they would rather fill up the void than let Sunni terrorists actually take over the region. This is why you've developed as what a lot of your neoconservatives have called it, a Shia crest within the region. Now, this has actually been caused from American, Israeli, and Sunni intervention. Now, if they didn't want this in the first place, they could have actually had the idea of not invading Iraq, and not invading Syria, and not invading Libya. If they didn't do this in the first place, they wouldn't have that problem. And this is where we get to the idea of what needs to happen on the idea of foreign policy. And when we're talking about what is an actual idea of fair criticism and what's bigotry with it, there's nothing wrong with criticizing any state. I mean, is it anti-Semitism to criticize Saudi Arabia? Because there's plenty of people out there criticizing Saudi Arabia. Is that Islamophobic, or is that anti-Semitism? No, I don't think so, because you look at their human rights record. The same thing when it comes to Israel. They're just a state. They're just no different than any other country. When it comes down to it, there's no difference. We have no loyalties to any other country other than our own. And when it comes down to it, and this is why when it comes down to it is Ilhan Omar is right with saying the idea of not being loyal to your country first is unbelievably insane. And she's pointed this out with a lot of these people, basically, where they're actually showing loyalty to another country over their own. But I think she could actually be a little more consistent by actually showing loyalty to her country, by actually showing that she is going to go after CARE, which is essentially showing loyalty to Saudi Arabia over her own country. And this is one of the problems that I think she does have currently. And this is something that she could actually fix. But when it comes to people like Ben Shapiro, don't exactly think that he's going to fix anything. I mean, he's the last bit of a young part of a dying breed. I mean, he's none too bright. I mean, he probably drank lead paint as a kid. So this is why he's a neoconservative and doesn't believe in actual individual liberty, and why he's one of these people who believe in these puritanical ideas. And pretty much, I mean, you look at why he wasn't for Trump and why he's for Ted Cruz. It's because he wouldn't have been for Ted Cruz had Ted Cruz been for more individual liberty. I mean, if he were for individual liberty from the start, he should have been for a guy like Rand Paul. But he wouldn't have been for Rand Paul because Rand Paul doesn't support the idea of intervention. The moment that Ted Cruz said he wanted to bomb the people into the Stone Age, he goes, "Hey, that's my guy." The moment that Ted Cruz said that on the first debate, that's when Shapiro said, "That's my guy." That's why Ben Shapiro stated that. That's why Ben Shapiro went behind Ted Cruz. It was because of that statement right there that Ted Cruz said he was going to bomb him back in the Stone Age. Yeah, like that's really going to do anything with it. You'd realize what happens every time we actually drop any attacks on these people. When we attack them, is basically 90% of the people attacked are innocent civilians. Yeah, guess what happens with the other people, the other relatives of those innocent civilians the people get attacked. Guess what happens with them? All of them become terrorists because they're pissed off because we killed their relatives. That's what happens. They get pissed. They say, the Americans killed my family, and I'm going to get revenge. And guess what happens? These terrorist groups pop up. And if you look at it in history, terrorism has existed since 1 AD. This is one thing neoconservatives, if they actually studied history, would actually know. Terrorism has existed long before our country. It's existed long before most other religions exist. It's existed before Islam did. So when we're talking about it's basically, it goes back really far, and we're talking that terrorism has basically been a major point. I mean, they can pretty much document it back to 1 AD. It probably goes well before that, and well before then as well. But we can definitely document it back to 1 AD. And we know that there's definite records of terrorism back then. And basically, you're going to create more terrorism if you start killing innocent civilians. If you want to create less of it, I mean, this is basically, we have records of it. If you want to create less of it, you attack them less, because you're killing less innocent civilians. Less innocent civilians you kill, the less people that are actually going to want to kill you, because the less blowback you're going to get. It's just common sense. If you want to actually create an actual legitimate uh, defense setup, you only need about $250 billion, and it's just to cover what we actually need to defend ourselves. Not only have I stated this in what I've actually done for my work for both my bachelor's in history and my master's in public administration, but this has also been reiterated just recently by David Stockman. I mean, you're pretty much not going to. Pretty much when it comes down to financial advice and basically understanding the political system, you're not going to get much better than that. So, it shows that I know exactly what I am talking about. We don't need essentially three times that amount, and essentially the Department of Defense essentially is asking even more than that because they want a contingency fund. So when we're looking at this means people like Ben Shapiro have no idea what they're talking about. They don't even know how to study the basic facts of history. You don't actually create less terrorists by blowing them up. You create less terrorists by actually being being a non-interventionist and actually backing away and defending your own nation. That's all you need to do. This is actually what the founders knew. And the founders basically, when it comes down to it, when they actually ratified the actual Constitution with the Bill of Rights, we know that they had 1,790 years of experience with terrorism existing. This means that they kind of knew something by then. I mean, since then we've only had for years of experience. I mean, we've had less than 300 years. Yet they had over 1,700 years of experience. We've had 200 years and counting. Basically, we're talking about 250 years next to about over 1,700 years, almost 1,800 years of experience. I mean, this shows you exactly what we're coming from for history on terrorism. They knew more than we did from what we've accomplished since the actual what they came from before, next to what has happened since the actual start of the country. Frankly, with what we've actually done is we're basing our information on about 30 years of experience. Between 30 to about 50 years of experience, which is completely irrational because we don't know what actually happens when you don't bomb someone. When you don't bomb someone, they usually tend to not strike back. And when they don't have access to you, they don't strike back either. And this is something when you have these Trotskyites like Ben Shapiro that don't know what they're talking about, they say, just bomb them in the Stone Age. And that's all you need to say to get his vote. And you have people who are Jewish but not Semitic like him that tend to play the victim card every time someone criticizes them. He'll go, "Oh my God, I'm the victim," and he uses this, and then he'll go on the other side, "Oh, I'm sick of those liberals playing the victim." Well, you might want to start looking in the mirror when it comes to playing the victim first, Ben. Now, if you like this one, like, subscribe, click the notification bell, make sure to share us all the way around to your friends and everyone publicly. Maybe if you can share us to Ben Shapiro's page or anything like that, that would help with it. Make sure he sees how much of a damn fool he is. And make sure to check out my Patreon page if you're willing to donate. It would really help me. And see if you can get other people interested, and that's about it, everybody. Bye, everyone.